So since 2004, you have a new 40-year cycle, and those 40-year cycles are divided into four 10-year periods. We are now in the second, what we call the second watch of that 40-year period, which is called a generation. One generation is 40 years from 2004. The first watch brought us to 2014. Interestingly enough, we entered into the second watch, which is the second 10-year period from 2014, which will end in 2024. Second watch, which is called the Midnight Watch.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne, creator of the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 video series. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today I have Demetrius Leach, Spencer Heston, and Christopher Leach. And in this first segment here, Demetrius and I talk about intertwining 3,500 year, 2,000, 70-year, 40-year, and 10-year interlooping cycles, along with Jubilee and biblical prophecy timelines into these massive earth changes that we're starting to see right now. And it's really interesting how all what was foretold thousands of years ago across cultures and religions pointing to this exact same time right now. We're pinpoint focused on 2024. So here we go. Demetrius, hey, good evening.
Hey, good evening, David. How are you doing?
Yeah, doing well. Really trying to look for the positive side of things in these changes. So we sit at the precipice of prophecy meeting our real world lives right now. It's quite the interesting time for all of us to be witness to not only the ancient cultures talking about this time in history right here, this year 2000, if you will, within a couple years on a 3,600 or 2,000 year cycle. And we have all the biblical prophecies and everything's matching right up to right this time. And it's every time we move another day, like with the United States, moving toward more of a communist system here, it does seem that there's another check the box of this is exactly what it was prophesied to be. I am curious with the food shortages inbound, with the unstable growing areas on the planet, all these countries right now trying to get as much food as they can because they can't grow it in their countries. Governments around the world changing, systems coming in that are oppressive. We're starting to see everything play out literally verse for verse, word for word. It's incredible times we're in.
Definitely.
So where do you see us moving to in terms of what do you see in the prophecies moving forward for like the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years? So how far are we down this timeline into the ultimate end?
Well, it's interesting that you just said the ultimate end, and ultimate means that it is the final, and that also can suggest that there are different ends to come. My thought here is I see Adapt 2030. And this Adapt 2030 is based upon the United Nations Sustainable Development Plan, right? The agenda.
It's not. I started this channel before they came into their 2030 plan because we have to adapt our food growing strategies before 2030 because the way we grow food now and where we grow food presently, as the jet streams shift, we're not going to be able to continue to grow food in the same areas. So long before 2030, we will have had to shift the way we do it and where we grow it, new seed species, etc. They were still on Agenda 21 when I started my channel like 8 years ago. So the 2030 is a new thing, and you're the second or third person who said the same thing. Hey, are you on that United Nations Agenda 2030? Absolutely not.
The United Nations 2030 agenda began in 2015, and they put down 15 years for the purpose of bringing the world into sustainable development, where they want to eradicate poverty. They want to bring in, as it were, a world utopia where there is a one world religion, where they have come to a place that they can say peace and safety. So their sights are on 2030, and they're very advanced in their program right now. And they're shaping up what we are seeing in the world today with even what is happening with our former President Trump and what is going on in the present administration. I can assure you that they are positioning themselves to reach their goal. They are, as it were, fast forwarding because they don't want to drag behind. We are right now in 2021, and it is just a mere 9 years for them to reach their particular agenda. And a number of things are involved in this agenda, which would include the environment and the eradication of poverty, also bringing in a one world religion, covering all sectors of human society and human beings. They're looking at the political area where you have a one world government, and one world government does not necessarily mean, and I'm sure that you would know this, that all of the world really are under one individual. One world government can also mean that they are running by the very same policies. They are running by the very same systems and structures. As a matter of fact, you would realize that now in the COVID period, you have virtually a one world system going to manage the entire globe. Every single country is functioning under the same protocols. That is a one world governance. So when people are looking for a one world government from the point of view of one man in charge, it is really a one world governance where a body of people will be in charge and giving rise to religious domination once again, and that is all part of it. So in my estimation, I'm seeing that in their agenda, and it is very interesting that you should have Adapt 2030, you are seeing things from the geological point of view, but they are seeing it from the economics and politics and bringing in their utopia. These are the governments of the world. These are the leaders of the world, and they have the 2030 agenda. And I can say that it was in AD 31, and I want you to catch this point. In AD 31, Christ was crucified, and this is a historical fact. And he was raised from the dead, and he went to heaven, and he's there interceding on behalf of humanity. This is all also in the Bible. Now, the thing is, AD 31, 2,000 years after AD 31 brings us to 2031. But the interesting thing is that in the Bible, it also speaks about Jubilees, which is every 50 years. Therefore, if you have 2,000 years from AD 31 to 2031, that is exactly 40 Jubilees, 40 50-year periods. And 40 is extremely important within God's economy. 40 is the number of a generation. But 40 it also has to do with judgment. So judgments are about to come. Judgments are about to come upon this world. But 40 Jubilees, 40 50-year periods is telling us that Christ himself is about to do something to bring restoration, rehabilitation to his universe. A thought to note also is that in prior to the first coming of Christ and him coming to the temple, to even to his death, you had the children of Israel, the Israelites coming out of Egypt. And it was exactly 1,500 years from that first Paschal lamb that was slain in Egypt which was 1,500 years. And guess what? That is exactly 30 Jubilees. So 30 Jubilees from Egypt to Christ, 40 Jubilees from Christ to 2031. So you now have three sets of numbers now. You have the 30 Jubilees, the 40 Jubilees, and 70 Jubilees in all. That is very interesting. And note that number 70 is very important because the children of Israel spent 70 years in Babylon. And they also were given a prophecy of 70 weeks, which really will be 490 years for the coming of Christ and for the close of their probation. So these numbers are really adding up. And now that you're coming with this 2030, which you got out of your own investigations, it's interesting that these things are really lining up. So what we are seeing in prophecy, biblical prophecy right now, is actually lining up to your 2030. I call it is the crossing of agendas. The world has an agenda, 2030, and God has an agenda, 2031. And this is telling me that things are going to coalesce. Things are really going to cross at a particular point. God is about to bring down the curtains on a great controversy and deliver his people. That is what we believe.
Let me throw an idea there. I have heard the exact same thing you have, but this is so interesting when you said that. Your AD 31 for the crucifixion, we were taught up here AD 33. So a 2-year difference, but the crucifixion in the 30s. We were taught AD 33, and you have it AD 31. That's interesting. And the Jubilee that we're taught about here is 7-year cycles, so 49 years versus your 50-year. So it's very similar, and the numerology is very similar. Same information we're looking at as 1 year or a couple of years difference. I find that so fascinating. Why do you think the numbers that we're both looking at we have the same context of the events and the cycles, but I'm wondering why the numbers are different?
No, we are looking at the very same scripture, and the 49 years would be 7-year cycles, but then he says the 50th year will be the Jubilee. So the 50th year will not be the 49th year. You have 7-year cycles, and then the 50th year would be then the Jubilee. And then you go into another 7-year cycles, 49 years, and then the 50th year will be the Jubilee. So the Jubilee was always every 50th year was the Jubilee, but you first have to complete 7-year cycles.
So that would be a reset of the debt and a starting of a new then after this 50th year.
Correct.
So what happens when we come to the 70th Jubilee then? This again, the mystical number 7 here. Come to 70 at the Jubilee. I mean, what kind of reset could there possibly be at this ultimate of the greatest of cycles of the Jubilee? I'm curious.
The coming of Jesus Christ, the final Jubilee of this year, which will now take us, because Jubilee has a particular purpose. The purpose of the Jubilee is to set the captives free, to bring to complete restoration, to not only for the land, but also for individuals who have been sold into slavery. And all humanity has been sold into slavery because of Adam's sin. However, Jesus said he came to set the captives free. And the final Jubilee will be the ultimate freeing of the human race from all sin, from the condemnation, and from the dominion, and also from the presence of sin, the final Jubilee. So we're looking for that.
That's something to look forward to, because you mentioned it before, in this new agenda to 2030, they want to eliminate poverty. Well, that's real easy if everybody's poor, because there would be no poverty if everybody's impoverished. Everybody would be equal at that point. And the way central banking seems to be dominating the sphere of influence and, causing so much hardship to humanity through the wars and, the inequality and the destruction of the planet and the overusage and control of natural resources, I would be very happy to get away from this model and move into something more on the side of light myself.
It all depends on how you interpret, or how persons interpret poverty versus wealth.
And how prepared are you for the transition into the grand solar minimum? Are you prepared for emergencies? Our friends at My Patriot Supply do have long-term, storable, and emergency food supplies. The 2-week grab-and-go food crate or the 4-week emergency food supply. They also have a large range of water filtration and items you can use yourself to get ready, such as Mylar bags, oxygen packs, things you can use to DIY your own long-term storable foods, and a host of different survival items that you might not have thought about during your preparations. Use the Adapt 2030 link in the description box below. And while you're there, take a look at the selection of heirloom seeds, because you're going to have to grow some of your own food moving forward into the new Eddy Grand Solar Minimum. Take back your peace of mind by knowing that you're prepared when others might not be.
And we have the standard dollar as a standard for determining whether or not you're wealthy. And the reality is your wealth is not determined by the American dollar. Your wealth is not determined by the amount of riches that you can amass here on this earth. Your wealth is determined upon your understanding, or how wealthy you are is really not how many things you have, but how you really gauge yourself within the context of your environment. Therefore, you don't have to have a lot of money to be wealthy. It is when you know that you're wealthy that you attract your wealth to you. And the things on the outside, they are not the things that will determine who you are. So it is not a matter of gaining things. Life is not about the amount of money that you make. Life, it has to do with the collection of experiences, so that when you look down memories hall, you can remember good memories. That is what life is all about. And those people who don't depend upon the dollar, they have a sense of wealth, they would recognize that they are not impoverished. Once you can have those basic necessities, once you can eat, once you can have some place to sleep, once you can have something to wear, and be protected from the environment, whatever it is that gives you fulfillment. And money does not give you fulfillment. You can have a lot of money and yet you hang yourself. So God himself desires, our Creator desires, that we understand that our wealth and our fulfillment is not based upon the acquisition of things on this earth. As a matter of fact, there's a guy by the name of Anthony Robbins. He says, success without fulfillment is total failure. I really believe in that. You need to be fulfilled based upon what you're doing and not what you have accrued in this life. And that is where our Creator wants to bring us right now, where we can be content on a daily basis. Jesus himself said that sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. If we are contented with what we receive on a daily basis, our food, our clothing, our shelter, says, do not seek for those things of tomorrow. The worries of tomorrow, don't bring them into the day. The worries of yesterday, leave them where they are. Live in your present and experience your fulfillment in your present. That is how you can experience wealth. Each moment.
Yeah, I would agree, because look at how up here in the U.S. that people going back to grow their own food and have their own chickens and get back into the countryside is now considered the way that you can live your life to the fullest, knowing where your food comes from, putting your feet back into the earth and feeling it, touching back to nature, becoming more one with the Creator and divinity and creation itself. This is where the new movement is, where either it's self-directed or it's directed in a way for society, but that push is that direction there. And this whole thing about fear that they're trying to push across the planet, of everything, to be afraid of the virus, to be afraid of the collapsing economy, be afraid of the movement into communism in the United States, be afraid of your neighbor, be afraid of this person over here. They don't believe the same thing you do. Once you come past the fear and you realize that, like you said, it's in the moment. They always try to get you to think about the future. That's where the fear is, in the future. And I think if we can just stay in the moment, that fear would disappear, because if the threat's not with you right this second or around you, that fear is a monster. Like in a dark room, you're afraid of the dark, but when you turn on the light, then suddenly there's nothing to see. It's not scary any longer.
Right. And that thought that you mentioned is so critically important for us to embrace, because if you are in a boat and then you're in the storm and you have confidence that your vessel, that your boat can withstand the storm, that confidence in your vessel will eliminate fear from you. So it is what we place our confidence in that will determine to a very great extent whether or not we live in fear. So if we place our confidence in the government, if we place our confidence in our parents or in our spouse, if we place our confidence in even the earth to produce for us, eventually we are going to live in fear because none of those things that were mentioned can really be sustainable. And when they are taken away, fear would be left, and we're going to live in fear. And the Bible does say that men's heart will fail them for fear because of the things that they see that are coming upon the earth. So eventually we will come to understand that not even the earth itself can sustain us. And if we don't have something even greater in our estimation than the earth itself, we also are going to suffer with fear and anxiety. And we are told that Christ came for the purpose of delivering us from fear. He's delivering us from that fear of death by setting our sights on something that is even greater, and that is an eternal reality. That if our hope is only within the context of the things that we have here on earth, we are of all men most miserable. Therefore, we need something greater even than the earth, even than what this earth can do, even than what people can do for us this side of eternity. As a matter of fact, would come to realize that what the government is doing, they have relief packages where they are giving people money so that they would be able, some invisible enemy there, that they can become your big brother, that they would be able to look after you and you have your confidence in them. The reality is, having confidence in them, you're going to end up living in fear. Having confidence in the earth, you're going to end up living in fear. Our confidence must be exclusively in God alone, who can maintain us. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. So if you are in the middle of the city and you have God, you don't have to fear. If you are in the middle of the desert and you have God, you don't have to fear. He says, if you take the wings of the morning and dwell in the nether parts of the earth, if you make up your bed in hell, you don't have to fear, because I am there. I am the one that is with you. It is only when God is with you that you can exist within a fear-free environment, regardless to the tumult that is going on around you. Well, Christ was walking on the water. The disciples were all fearful. Christ was not. Christ was walking upon that which they were fearful of. They themselves, Peter himself asked, Lord, can I come out and walk too? And Christ said yes. As long as he kept his eyes on Christ, nothing could have put him down. But he shifted his attention from Christ and he began to sink. If our minds are shifted from the Creator, the only one that can sustain us, and to the earth or to anything else or anyone else for our security, we are actually going to begin to sink.
You know, you mentioned earth changes there, and, you know, marching down the timeline that I have, the four gas giants are lining up in the solar system to make a perfect square coming up in 2024. Now, when this happens, there'll be a second slight magnetic field in our solar system in addition to the one that's generated by the sun. So as the Earth passes through this magnetic field, we're going to have an enormous amount of earth changes so far above anything that you have seen in the last 2,000 years at least. Mud volcanoes, landslides, sinkholes opening up. Talking about here, people who are going to be frightened on what they see coming through the skies. They'll have heart attacks when they see these things that are unfolding in front of them in terms of earth changes. So there's about 3 years left before this comes into at least the first wave. After that passes, we have one more wave through 2028. And then we come back on the backside here in 2030, and things start to dissipate out through 2032, 2035, and it should be back to sort of normal like it is today. We're going to go rolling through two of these waves, magnetic shifts on our planet here. And what are you seeing in the timelines for these earth changes coming up? These things are going to be vast. It's really going to make a dent into food production globally. And if people can't eat, they're going to become very uncontrollable. And my take on it of what's happening in the U.S. right now, you're right, it's a global plan under one world governance, one system. governments are going to get so much more draconian in terms of locking down the citizens and making them do this or forcing them to do that. I think, is my own opinion here, that the closer we get to these earth changes that are so vast that we can't grow enough food to feed the planet, in response, the governments are going to be even more hard-handed with the citizens to control them, because starving people are uncontrollable. So if you can control every resource before the problem, you can have the citizens obey, know what they need to do to get access to the resources. And if you step out of line, you're either crushed or there's no resources for you. So I believe they're doing that right now. And this is the first year of validation that we are in for some massive changes. So, Demetrius, I was wondering what you might think in the timeline moving forward with these earth changes. How do you see this moving forward with the prophecies as well?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, you have mentioned some dates that are very, very critical. And even your prognosis on the very near future is very, very interesting. Jesus himself said that there will be famines and earthquakes and pestilences in many places. And we know that these things were happening throughout the centuries, but the frequency and the intensity will be of such that they will be very, very noticeable. And you mentioned 2024, which is so significant to the particular timeline in which we are looking at. Note that the number 40 is extremely significant, and it is our understanding that after the 2300-day prophecy, which began in 457 BC, it ended in October the 22nd, 1844. The ministration of Christ changed, where he is now performing the work of preparing a people, perfecting them in righteousness, and this is called the cleansing of the sanctuary. So a people have been receiving great revelations of light regarding not only what Christ is doing in the most holy place of the heavenly sanctuary, but also what is happening upon the face of the earth, and America being central in prophecy itself. From 1844, you have, according to the prophecies of Joel, chapter 1, you have 4 cycles, 4 40-year cycles. And 160 years, those 4 40-year periods, which is one historical cycle, ended really in 2004. Since 2004, we are now in a new cycle, and Joel says in Joel 2:25 that this is now a period of restoration. So since 2004, you have a new 40-year cycle, and those 40-year cycles are divided into 4 periods, 4 10-year periods. We are now in the second, what we call the second watch of that 40-year period, which is called a generation. One generation is 40 years from 2004. The first watch brought us to 2014. Interestingly enough, we entered into the second watch, which is the second 10-year period from 2014, which will end in 2024. Second watch, which is called the midnight watch. And these watches, we should know them. You have the evening watch, the midnight watch, the cock-crowing watch, and the morning watch. And they were also accepted by the Romans, who would have watches on the walls during the course of the night. Jesus himself said in Matthew chapter 25, when there was midnight, there was a cry heard, behold, the bridegroom cometh. So we are looking for what is called the midnight watch, the midnight cry in this midnight watch to occur, which will take us into the cock-crowing watch, which is bringing us into the morning. Interestingly enough, from 2024, 10 years will take us to 2034. But short of 2034, you have 2031, where the 2,000 years since Christ entered the most heavenly sanctuary to begin his ministration will end 3 years short of it. So you have within the third watch, the 40th Jubilee.
This video is brought to you by our friends at TrueLeafMarket.com. Heirloom and organic seeds for any grow zone on our planet.